Welcome to All the Horror Podcast, a chilling space where nightmares come to life and the shadows whisper their secrets. I'm Lawrence, your guide through the eerie, the unexplained, and the downright terrifying. Each episode will dive into spine-tingling tales, haunting mysteries, and the darkest corners of folklore and history. So dim the light, hold your breath, and prepare for a journey into the unknown. This is All the Horror Podcast, where fear is our favorite story. The wind howled through the barren trees, the skeletal branches clawing at the night sky. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, trying to ward off the chill that seemed to seep into my very bones. The crunch of dead leaves beneath my feet was the only sound that broke the eerie silence as I made my way down the deserted street. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I turned, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just shadows dancing in the pale moonlight. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, followed, hunted. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The houses on either side of the street seemed to loom over me, their darkened windows like empty eye sockets staring down at my lone figure. I could have sworn I heard whispers on the wind, urgent and insistent, but I couldn't make out the words. As I rounded the corner, I came face to face with nothing. The street stretched out before me, empty and silent, but the feeling of dread remained, settling in the pit of my stomach like a lead weight. I knew then that this night was far from over, and that the true horror was just beginning. Welcome, dear listeners, to another spine-chilling episode of All the Horror Podcast. I am your host, Lawrence, and tonight I have a tale that will make you question the very nature of reality and the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. But before we delve into the depths of tonight's terrifying narrative, I must warn you, what you're about to hear is not for the faint of heart. It's a story of obsession, of the darkness that lurks within the human psyche, and of the terrible price we pay when we dare to peek behind the curtain of our perceived reality. So, dim the lights, lock your doors, and prepare yourself. For once you hear this tale, you may never look at the world the same way again. Our story begins in the quaint town of Millbrook, a place that, on the surface, seemed like any other sleepy suburban community. But beneath its picturesque facade, Millbrook harbored secrets darker than the deepest pit of hell. Our protagonist, let's call him Alex, was a seemingly ordinary man in his mid-30s. He worked as a data analyst for a local tech company, lived alone in a modest apartment, and spent most of his free time indulging in his passion for photography. To his neighbors and co-workers, Alex was just another face in the crowd, unremarkable and forgettable. But Alex had a secret that would soon plunge him into a nightmare beyond imagination. It all started on a crisp autumn evening, much like the one I described earlier. Alex had just purchased a new camera, a high-end DSLR that he'd been saving up for months to buy. Eager to test out his new toy, he decided to take a walk through Millbrook Park, hoping to capture some shots of the sunset. As he strolled along the winding paths of the park, Alex found himself drawn to an old, gnarled oak tree that stood alone in a small clearing. There was something about the way its twisted branches reached towards the sky that caught his eye. He raised his camera, adjusted the focus, and pressed the shutter button. That's when he saw it. Just for a split second, as he looked through the viewfinder, Alex could have sworn he saw a face peering back at him from between the branches of the oak tree. It was gone in an instant, so quick that Alex convinced himself it must have been a trick of the light, or his imagination playing tricks on him. But when he got home and uploaded the photos to his computer, his blood ran cold. There, in the image of the oak tree, partially hidden by the shadows of the branches, was a face. It was distorted, almost inhuman, with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. Alex's first instinct was to delete the photo, to pretend he had never seen it. But something stopped him. A morbid curiosity, perhaps, or maybe something darker, something that whispered to him from the depths of his subconscious, urging him to look closer, to uncover the truth behind this impossible image. And so began Alex's descent into madness. Over the next few weeks, Alex became obsessed with the photo. He spent hours staring at it, analyzing every pixel, convinced that if he looked hard enough, he would find some rational explanation for what he had captured. He tried every photo editing software he could find, adjusting contrast, brightness, sharpness, anything that might reveal more details. But the more he looked, the more unsettling the image became. He began to notice other faces hidden in the shadows of the tree's branches. Dozens of them, all with the same distorted features, all seeming to stare directly at him with their hollow, lifeless eyes. Alex's work began to suffer. He called in sick more often than not, spending his days and nights hunched over his computer, his eyes bloodshot and his mind racing. His apartment, once tidy and well kept, fell into disarray. Empty takeout containers and unwashed dishes piled up, but Alex barely noticed. His world had narrowed to the confines of that single, terrifying image. He tried to tell himself that it was just a photo, just a strange trick of light and shadow. But deep down, he knew. He knew that he had captured something that was never meant to be seen by human eyes. Something that existed in the spaces between reality, in the cracks and crevices of our world where nightmares take form. As his obsession grew, Alex began to experience strange phenomena. He would wake in the middle of the night, certain that he had heard whispers coming from his computer. Sometimes, out of the corner of his eye, he would catch glimpses of distorted faces peering at him from reflective surfaces, windows, mirrors, even the screen of his phone. But when he turned to look directly, they would vanish, leaving him questioning his own sanity. One night, about a month after he had taken the photo, Alex woke to find his computer on, the image of the tree displayed on the screen. He was sure he had turned it off before going to bed. As he stared at the screen, his heart pounding in his chest, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The faces in the image were moving. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. But as Alex watched, frozen in terror, the movement became more pronounced. The faces seemed to be pushing against the confines of the image, as if trying to break free. Their mouths opened and closed, silently screaming, their hollow eyes fixed on Alex with an intensity that made him feel as if they were staring into his very soul. Panicked, Alex reached out to turn off the computer, but as his hand neared the power button, he felt a sudden, violent pull. It was as if an invisible force had grabbed hold of him, trying to drag him into the screen. He fought against it, his muscles straining, sweat beading on his forehead. But the pull was relentless, growing stronger with each passing second. Just as Alex thought he would be sucked into that nightmare realm, he managed to hit the power button. The screen went black, and the pulling sensation vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Alex collapsed to the floor, his heart racing, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of his bedroom, too terrified to sleep, jumping at every creak and groan of his apartment building. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through his window, Alex made a decision. He had to destroy the photo to erase all evidence of what he had seen. Only then, he hoped, would he be free of this waking nightmare. With shaking hands, Alex turned on his computer. But as the screen flickered to life, his heart sank. The desktop was empty. All of his files, including the photo, were gone. In their place was a single text document. With a sense of dread, Alex opened it. The document contained only 4 words. "We see you." Alex. Panic overtook him. Alex grabbed his laptop, ran out of his apartment, and drove to the nearest electronics store. He bought a new hard drive and spent the next several hours painstakingly wiping his computer, reinstalling the operating system, anything to erase all traces of that cursed image. For a few days, Alex dared to hope that it was over, that whatever malevolent force he had inadvertently captured in that photo was gone. He returned to work, apologizing profusely for his absence and throwing himself into his tasks with renewed vigor. He cleaned his apartment, restocked his fridge, and even made plans to meet up with some friends he had been neglecting. But his relief was short-lived. It started small. A co-worker mentioned in passing that Alex looked different in his ID photo. When Alex checked, he felt the blood drain from his face. The photo, which had been taken years ago when he first started at the company, now showed his face distorted in the same way as the faces in the tree. Hollow eyes, mouth stretched in a silent scream. He rushed to the HR department, insisting there must have been some mistake, that someone must have tampered with his file. But when the HR manager pulled up his records, the photo was normal. Alex's protests were met with concerned looks and gentle suggestions that he might want to take some time off to rest. That night, as Alex tossed and turned in his bed, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, he heard a noise from his living room. It was a soft, rhythmic sound, like someone slowly turning the pages of a book. Heart pounding, Alex crept out of his bedroom. The sight that greeted him in the living room would haunt him for the rest of his days. Every surface, the walls, the floor, even the ceiling, was covered in photographs. Thousands upon thousands of them, all showing the same distorted faces he had seen in the oak tree. And in the center of the room, floating in mid-air, was his camera. As Alex watched, paralyzed with fear, the camera turned towards him. There was a blinding flash, and Alex felt a searing pain throughout his body. He screamed, but no sound came out. He tried to run, but his feet seemed rooted to the spot. The world around him began to warp and twist, reality itself seeming to bend and fracture. And then, suddenly, it was morning. Alex found himself in his bed, drenched in sweat, his throat raw as if he had been screaming all night. Had it all been a nightmare? He stumbled out of bed, desperate for some sign that what he had experienced wasn't real. But as he entered his living room, his heart sank. While the walls weren't covered in photographs as they had been in his nightmare, his camera sat on the coffee table. He was sure he had left it in its bag the night before. With trembling hands, Alex picked up the camera and turned it on. There was one new photo in its memory. When he viewed it, he had to stifle a scream. That was the moment Alex knew. Whatever he had captured in that first photo, whatever entity or force resided in that twisted oak tree, it had now captured him. He was trapped, caught between worlds, his very essence somehow bound to that cursed image. In the days that followed, Alex's grip on reality continued to slip. He would find himself losing time, coming to his senses in strange places with no memory of how he got there. His reflection in mirrors and windows became increasingly distorted, until he could barely recognize himself. People began to avoid him. His co-workers would fall silent when he entered a room, averting their eyes and making excuses to leave. His friends stopped returning his calls. Even strangers on the street seemed to shy away from him, crossing to the other side when they saw him coming. Alex knew he was changing, becoming something other than human. He could feel it in his bones, in the very fabric of his being. But he was powerless to stop it. One night, about 2 months after he had taken that fateful photo, Alex found himself drawn back to Millbrook Park. His feet seemed to move of their own accord, carrying him along the familiar paths, until he stood before the old oak tree. In the pale moonlight, the tree seemed to writhe and twist, its branches reaching out like grasping fingers. And there, in the spaces between the branches, Alex saw the faces. No longer confined to a photograph, they pushed against the very fabric of reality, their silent screams echoing in the depth of his mind. As Alex stood there, transfixed by the horrifying spectacle before him, he felt a tugging sensation. It started in his chest, a gentle pull that quickly grew in intensity. He tried to run, to tear his gaze away from the tree, but it was too late. The world around him began to blur and distort, colors bleeding into one another, shapes twisting and warping. Alex felt himself being drawn towards the tree, his body becoming insubstantial, merging with the shadows and the twisted branches. In his last moments of consciousness, he understood the terrible truth. He had not captured something in that photograph 2 months ago. Something had captured him. And as the last vestiges of Alex's humanity slipped away, as his essence merged with the countless other souls trapped within that eldritch oak, a new face appeared among the branches. A face with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched wide in a silent, eternal scream. In the days that followed, the residents of Millbrook noticed that the old oak tree in the park seemed different somehow. Those who passed by it often felt a sense of unease, as if they were being watched. Some claimed to have seen faces in its gnarly branches, while others spoke of hearing whispers on the wind. But such stories were quickly dismissed as urban legends, the product of overactive imaginations. Life in Millbrook continued as it always had, the disappearance of an unremarkable data analyst named Alex barely causing a ripple in the town's collective consciousness. And so the old oak tree stood, silent and watchful, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to peer too closely at its twisted branches. For in Millbrook, as in so many places, the boundary between our world and the realms of nightmare is thinner than we dare to imagine. And sometimes, all it takes is a single photograph to tear that boundary asunder. And there you have it, dear listeners, a tale of curiosity turned to obsession, of a man who peered too deeply into the abyss, only to find the abyss peering back. As I sit here in my studio, the shadows seeming to lengthen and deepen with each passing moment, I can't help but wonder what lurks in the corners of our world, just out of sight. What eldritch horrors might be captured by our cameras, our phones, our ever-watchful electronic eyes. And if we were to see these things, to truly comprehend the nightmares that exist in the spaces between realities, would we ever be the same? These are questions that haunt me, dear listeners, and as I prepare to sign off for the night, I leave you with one final thought to ponder in the dark hours before dawn. The next time you raise your camera to take a photo, ask yourself this: are you capturing an image, or is something capturing you? Until next time, this is Lawrence, reminding you to keep your eyes open, your wits about you, and your finger hovering over that delete button. For in this world of ours, some things are better left unphotographed. Good night, dear listeners, and sweet dreams, if you dare to sleep at all.